Education opens doors for the gospel, bringing hope to dark places and sparking lasting change around the world. At Teach Beyond, we're reaching the nations through education.
This is Transformed and Transformational, a podcast from Teach Beyond. I'm Kian.
And I'm Heather. We're exploring how the gospel transforms us and overflows to impact classrooms, communities, and the world.
Let's jump into today's conversation. I'm excited to talk to our guest, Alan McIlhenny, today.
Yes, I recently heard some of Alan's story, and I cannot wait to hear more of it today. It's really amazing to see all the twists and turns in his life that have led him to this point, and his faithfulness over the years has had such an impact on so many.
That is so true. And there is so much to this story that this week we're going to hear about Alan's story. And then next week, we'll have part two where we get to dive deeper into the story of open schools worldwide. The organization for which Alan served as executive director for a number of years and is now a part of Teach Beyond.
Alan is originally from Northern Ireland and now lives in Southwest England, but his life has taken him to many other places in the world, and I don't want to give away too much of that now, but it's everything from the Seychelles, which are islands off the coast of East Africa, to Nepal and beyond.
Alan currently serves on several Teach Beyond boards, our global board called the Global Committee, the Teach Beyond UK and Ireland board, and the Open Schools Worldwide board.
Let's go over to the conversation with Alan now. Welcome to the podcast, Alan.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Alan, we are so excited to have you here today, and we're going to talk a lot about what has become your life's work with children at risk, and specifically open schools worldwide. But we know that you are also a loving grandfather, and I'm just so curious to tell us if you can tell us a little bit about being a grandfather, about your grandchildren.
Okay, well, I've 6 brilliant grandkids, ranging from 14 down to 6. The youngest one's a beautiful girl who has big eyes, who charms me and knows how to control her grandfather. No, I really enjoy them. The 4 of them are homeschooled, and they live fairly close by, so I help once a week with the homeschooling. So that's fun.
Wow.
And I live beside
Once a
the beach.
teacher, always a teacher, right? You can't take the teacher out of you.
Yeah, and I live near a beach, 3 minutes walk from a lovely beach, so the kids enjoy coming to visit as well. So
that sounds ideal. Time with grandfather and with the beach right there. That's perfect.
That's it.
That's so good. Well, Alan, I also hear that you're a child at heart and you love model trains. Is that right? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Yes, I've built a model railway. I live in a small apartment, so the railway runs along one side of a wall and then across the top of the bed, the headboard.
Wow.
And, so I built this railway. It's just lots of items on it that bring back memories for me. I'm old enough to have lived through the steam era, so there's steam trains on it. And I've got models of all of the cars I've owned over the years.
Oh,
that's so fun.
And I proposed my wife down a harbour. So there's a harbour wall with a couple sitting on the wall, looking at each other romantically. So
yes. You know, I had no idea that there was such a personal aspect to it, but I love that it kind of brings back memories and has that personal connection. It's cool enough that you've built a railway around the house, but even cooler that it has that personal significance.
Yeah, it's fun to do it. That's one of my other main interest is playing the organ. I play the pipe organ.
So Alan, as we're talking about the trains, the model train you have in your apartment, and the kind of the items you have from your history in that model train, that's kind of what we're doing today in our episode. We're going to kind of look back and talk about where God has taken you. And we know one of the big points you have is you are a founder of Open Schools Worldwide, which became a part of Teach Beyond in 2019. So let's start off by just talking about what Open Schools is.
Okay. Well, basically, there are a lot of kids in the world who don't have an opportunity to go to school. Children who scavenge on rubbish dumps, who often don't officially exist because they have no birth certificate, and so they don't get to government schools. So I wanted to reach out to these kids and give them a basic education So we train church volunteers who will use our curriculum material to teach kids where they are, whether that's beside a rubbish dump or on the street or under a tree. And the aim is to either get the children to the level where they can go into a government school, or if they can't, then to give them basic skills of literature, numeracy, and life skills. So that's it in a nutshell. It's very simple. I
That's
think,
the goal, right? That it is simple and graspable and
yes.
reproducible throughout the world. And I'm really excited. We're going to have a chance to dive in more on open schools in a little while. But what's so fascinating to me is there's so much to your story even before open schools. So we want to kind of go back in time when you and your wife Margaret first met. You both had a desire to follow the Lord and serve internationally, not necessarily as missionaries. We're talking in that context now, but with the desire to serve the Lord and do so in another setting. And you began with teaching in the Seychelles and then Nepal. So I'd love for you to talk about those decision points. Like, how did you decide to say yes at each of those points in time? How did you know that that opportunity was from the Lord? There were lots of options. So, talk to us about those moments.
Okay. Well, first of all, I met my wife at a conference for young people interested in overseas. Margaret's father was a Methodist minister who had a great interest in overseas mission, and they often had missionaries staying in their manse. So she grew up knowing a lot of missionaries personally. And in my church, we had what's called Christian Endeavor. And again, there was a very strong missionary emphasis in that. And so I grew up reading stories of missionaries. And I never thought, well, I couldn't be a missionary. I didn't think I was, sounds bad, but I didn't think I was good enough or holy enough. I don't know how you describe it, but um, yeah, there was. I think we tended in my era to put missionaries up on a pedestal, and they sort of became special people. And I thought, well, I'm not that special. But after we got married, we both wanted to go overseas, and we saw an advert for a job in the Pacific Ocean, advertised through the British government in London. I went over for the interview, and at the interview, they said that job is gone, but would you like to go to the Seychelles? I hadn't a clue where the Seychelles was, but because at that stage, the airport had only been open about a year, I think. It
Oh,
wasn't an
wow.
international destination. Margaret was a librarian, so I rang her up and said, I've accepted a job in the Seychelles. Can you find out where we are going?
Yeah.
And she was very brave. She said, great. She found out where it was. But we had prayed before that if it was right, that God would open up this door for us. And so it was a surprise to find we were going to the Seychelles rather than the place I'd applied for.
Yeah.
God's hand was on it.
That's such an interesting point. Like, we had prayed. It was almost a blank check to the Lord, so to speak. Like, we'll
Exactly.
go where you want. We think it's this Pacific Ocean job. But then when it's something totally different, it's still a yes because it's a yes to the Lord.
Yes, so it was my wife had an adventurous spirit, so
Mm,
you know she was ready to go.
that's great.
E-
That's really
Even though
great.
it meant giving up, she'd got a good position in the library, and it meant giving that up, but still we went for it.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Talk about then when you decided to go to Nepal. Fast forward, what, a few years you were in the Seychelles and then returned home?
Yeah, well, in the Seychelles, we got very involved in the local church. I I played the organ in St Paul's Cathedral, and which is a nice thing to say. I was organist of St Paul's Cathedral. It had a
Yeah.
tin roof, but nobody
Yeah.
needs to know
Yeah.
that. And the organ was not very good, so I built an organ for the cathedral. I got the parts
Mm,
shipped out from the States and spent a year building an organ.
wow.
Wow.
So that was fun to do. But we also got involved with Far East Broadcasting, a Christian missionary radio station, part of FEBC.
Mm.
And we saw the struggles that female missionaries were having, what to do with their children when they reached secondary age. There was no schooling for them. So at that very early stage, we were introduced to the problems of education for missionary kids. But there was a change of government in the Seychelles, and our contract came to an end, and we went home. And we weren't sure what our next step was, and I applied for a few jobs, but the door kept closing. So we felt maybe that the Lord was wanting us to go overseas. So this time we started looking at missionary kids' schools, and because we'd seen the problems facing the children in Seychelles. And I was offered a position in Woodstock School in India. Um, the church I belonged to had no history of self-supported missionaries raising support. And so I talked to the Mission Society, and they agreed that they would send us to India. But there was a long delay. They expected us to go to Bible college first. And so we went off to Bible college and then got a message from Woodstock saying we were no longer needed. Somebody else was going. And it's a long, complicated story. It was back and forward. So our Mission Society offered us 3 different posts, one in Africa, one in Nepal, and one in the Pacific, of all places. And but we sat down. We wanted to know what the Lord's will was, so we sat down one night and we prayed. We read Bible readings. We made notes, and I think about it must have been 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning that we really felt peace that Nepal was the right thing. So it was a long session, but we were determined not to go to bed until we had felt peace. And then the next morning, this is the amazing bit of the story. We stepped out of our little flat in the grounds of the missionary college, and there was a Chinese man going past. And Margaret and I both heard him saying to us, "Good morning, you're the people going to Nepal." And when we asked him how he knew this, he looked at us in amazement and said, "No, I didn't speak," and walked off and sort of was a bit sort of cross with us for speaking to him. So
Wow.
we both heard that voice very clearly saying, "You're going to Nepal." And that was just amazing. And then the next day we got a message from Woodstock. Would we go to Woodstock? The person going there couldn't go. But we, yeah, we had decided, we were sure the Lord wanted us in Nepal. So we agreed to go to Nepal.
Wow. So many twists and turns just even in that,
Yes,
stretch of a few years, and even then in that stretch of a few days of trying to figure out what is the quote unquote right answer. And, sometimes the Lord doesn't provide such clear, like,
no,
this
no,
is the
exactly.
answer, but he did in this case bring you to a point of peace about it, confirmation with this person speaking, and then the determination to stick with that decision, even when the original plan came back around. And yeah, that's incredible to think about how he was growing your faith in that process.
It was, yes. I have to admit it was stressful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because we were both so convinced that we should be going to Woodstock at first. We
Mhm,
were really
mhm.
disappointed when it fell through.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
but it was all part of the Lord's plan. Looking back, hindsight is wonderful. You can look
Sure.
back and see.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
I was able to spend an extra term at the college um, and do some research, which
Wow,
really helped later on.
wow, interesting,
Yeah,
okay. Well, we're really skimming through like years of time in just a few minutes. It feels unfair, but we won't get to the
that's
whole story if we don't skim a little bit. But,
exactly.
lingering here just a little bit longer, I know these opportunities weren't always easy and, just full of adventure. You think about, oh, we went off to the Seychelles and then we went to Nepal and all these exciting, cross-cultural living experiences. But there was sickness and there was coup and there were language differences and lots of challenges that you faced along the way. So I'd love to hear what helped you to stay and, continue to serve faithfully for the time that you were in each of those places.
Yes, well, that amazing experience with hearing those words, "You're going to Nepal," was very helpful when times got difficult. When we first arrived in the language school, our son was just over a year old, and we arrived in. The electricity was off most of the time. The water failed, and there was nowhere to wash nappies, diapers, whatever you want to call them, and and learning language was not easy. Yeah, there were many trials, but but we were just both convinced that the Lord wanted us there, and so that was exciting. And even when I got to I was seconded to the university in Nepal to train math teachers, but is with the mission. So we were able to run a Bible study in our home, even though that was not officially allowed. Um, and Yeah, there were lots of interest. I got tear gassed 3 times because the students were always ratting about some issue or other. Yeah, we had a number of adventures, but it was a good time, and we met some amazing young Christians.
Did you ever question, you were raising kids during this time period too. So did you ever question like what the experiences of your own kids were as they were living away from family or, just experiencing different, the challenges you were facing certainly might have affected your family. So curious about that.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that was a big thing when we made the decision to go to Nepal, because at that time it was the seventh poorest country in the world, and we were very concerned about healthcare and for the kids, and but the mission had a hospital, so we sort of felt that would help. But I know for our parents, that was a big issue for them, taking our young children off to uh, a third world country. Um, yeah, but it was the kids loved it, and we were living close to the lakeside in Pokhara in Nepal, with the Himalayan mountains. Looking out of our bathroom window, we could see the Annapurna range, and yeah, the scenery was beautiful. So there were compensations for the difficulties.
Let's take a quick break for our weekly spotlight.
This week, we are focusing on open schools worldwide, which Alan has alluded to and will share more about next week. If you want to learn more about the opportunities to serve with open schools, visit the Teach Beyond Opportunity Board at teachbeyond.org/go.
Or for other ways to partner with open schools, you can visit the website at osww.org.
And now, back to the conversation with Alan. You were in Nepal. During that time, I know that out of there came your idea of resource-based learning models. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Resource-based learning is, instead of teacher-directed learning with a student sitting in a classroom, the student directs their own learning, but they're given a program with the curriculum, reading material, and we had a management structure. So they had a target to reach, each week, and if they didn't reach that target, they didn't get playing sport at the American Embassy. It was a great bribe to get the work done. But, so it's actually, the students could work at their own pace, working through written material, but knowing that there was always a teacher around if they needed to consult on something. There was always someone in the learning center to look after them. Um, Yeah, and it worked really well. Some of our kids took up research, and we used, we had a child research in forestry, and at 13 she presented her research to the Nepal Forestry Committee, and they took it on board as part of their policy for deforestation. And we took kids up onto the glacier and measured changes in the glacier, and we measured river flow down the Himalayas. We trekked up valleys where tourists went, and then valleys where tourists didn't go, and we compared the impact of tourism on the lifestyle of the people. So there's a lot of kids designed their own research, and then we facilitated. So yeah, it's it's very hard to describe it all, but it was very much based on allowing the kids to grow, get a love for learning. And all of our students, the feedback I was getting from them was when they went to university, they were way ahead of everybody because they knew how to study, how to maintain the targets, and yeah,
Like self-direct, like they have that
self-direct. Yes,
motivation. Yeah.
yeah. So we've had students go to Oxford, Harvard, Cambridge. Yeah, very very thrilling. And also, one of our former students came back to Nepal and became director of the mission.
That's amazing to be able to see that full cycle.
A whole
Um,
cycle. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
We came across the same issue in Nepal that we had in the Seychelles. Missionaries having to send their children home when they reached 11, 12 years, secondary level education. And the mission had 35 different sending bodies involved in it from all over the world. So to start a school for British kids would not be addressing the needs of a lot of others. Uh, so in that time in Birmingham at the college, I had come across this idea of resource-based learning. And so I started to think about how we could use that idea to set up a high school that would cater for many different nationalities and enable children to stay longer. Also, when I visited, part of my role in the university was training math teachers. So I would go out to visit schools, local schools, and the standard of education was terrible. So I was thinking about how we could develop something that could use teachers who maybe weren't particularly well trained. So it was all part of thinking through lots of issues that I was facing in everyday life. If there's time, there was one story that happened. Um, yeah, we arrived in this town called Pokhara and moved in this little local house. And the kitchen had a water tap, but no work surface whatsoever. So I drew up the design for a sort of work surface, so my wife could have somewhere to put the cooking
Yeah.
stuff,
Right.
and went down to the local carpenter. And a few days later, this man arrived with the work stop on his back. The Sherpa carried it up. But when we set it on our floor, it rocked, and I discovered all the legs were a different length. So I went back to the carpenter, and he showed me very proudly that the table sat really well on his floor, but it didn't work very well on my floor. And as I was thinking about that, I was realizing that much of the education I was seeing in Nepal was based on Western style education, and it just wasn't working. So they just, you had to adjust that table. The carpenter was so proud of his work that he made it work for him, and then he came up and adjusted the legs for my situation. And so I started thinking, I really need to take what I know about education and change it to work for a different situation, rather than just assuming that what has always worked continues to work in a new place.
What a great picture of that need for contextualization. That's great.
Well, that was the challenge. So the challenge was how could I design a learning system that would cater for our Japanese, our French, our Dutch, our Australians, our Canadians, the Americans, and the British, all in one building. And so I come up with this idea of part of the time they would study a program from their home country, but then we would have joint lessons in music and sport and drama. We'd have ordinary classroom lessons for a lot of the time. So we weren't allowed to start a school in Kathmandu, but we were allowed to start a study centre. So that's why it's called KISC, Kathmandu International Study Centre. But it actually was a school. We did everything in a normal school does, but had these package bits. So there was a learning centre, and the kids knew that from say 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock there would be a math specialist in the learning centre, so they could work on their maths programs.
Uh-huh.
So if they needed help, they could just see whoever was on duty. And then we had a whole management system of how to manage their progress and so on.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So it worked well. It meant we started a secondary high school with 3 teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and we were able to cover. We have Dutch and French and Japanese and
Wow. Yeah.
British, and we were able to cover them all.
Yeah. Yeah. That school, KISC, Kathmandu International Study Center, is still in existence today.
It
It's
is.
now connected to Teach Beyond. And I'm curious what it has meant to you looking at the growth of that and something that was just like the seed of an idea when you first moved there to now being, a full-fledged program. I'm curious how do you reflect on something like that? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's God's goodness again.
Yeah.
We had another story for you.
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
when we were proposed to the mission and parents that we thought there was a need for a school, we got together a team of parents who were interested, and then Margaret and I went on furlough. And while we were home, we got a letter from the mission saying there are only 3 children enrolled and there's no money. Do you think should go ahead? Uh, so we had another long night of prayer and Bible study and seeking peace about it. And again, we stayed up quite late. And then the next morning, 3 envelopes came through the door from the postman. And each one said, "We hear you're starting a school in Nepal. Here's a small gift." So they'd all been posted before we started praying. And that was enough. It was £300 we got. And so we ended up starting with 7 kids and a budget of £300. And so to look at KISC now with, I don't know, many students, God, I've lost count, but it's amazing growth. It grew very quickly while we were there, but just to see it continue to grow and serve it's thrilling. And it's only God's doing, because it was a bit stupid starting the school with 3 kids and no money.
Sounds a lot like 2 fish and 5 loaves and a basket, right?
Exactly.
Like we bring what we have and offer it to the Lord, and he does
Yes.
miracles with our meager offerings. Yeah.
As you're reflecting, as we're talking about your history and kind of where you've been at all these different locations, I'm curious if you've seen how that has impacted your understanding and your burden for children who live in poverty and have additional needs.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. After Nepal, I worked for Tear Fund for a while. Tear Fund is a Christian evangelical relief agency. And that took me to a number of countries. I visited favelas in Brazil and rubbish dumps, and saw extreme poverty. And one of the key moments that you may know of was in Calcutta, when I visited a school, a church that was working with street kids. They had a Christian school, and they brought kids in off the street and allowed them to wash and give them food, and they played some games, but they didn't give them any schooling, which I was disappointed with. But then, as I was walking back to my hotel one night, it was raining, and I stepped around this plastic bag. And as I stepped past it, this little girl, it still gets to me, this little girl stuck her head out and said, "Hello, Uncle Alan." And to see a child that I'd been playing with earlier sleeping on a pavement in horrible rain, it broke my heart. And yeah, I, I was angry with myself. I have to confess I was angry with God because I couldn't understand why this should be happening. And I think that incident was one of the things that kept me going and eventually led to open schools. There
Mm,
were others.
yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it is those points of just how is this happening, Lord, that actually leads to the breakthrough that He wants to use us to be part of. And we don't know exactly how that's all happening, but it takes coming to that point of really questioning and struggling with it to then propel us into that, obedient next step.
That's it. Yes, it is. It was very much. I could see the Lord had prepared me for that, because the resource-based learning system and the challenge to look at education in a different way helped me then design the program that we used for
Mm,
open schools.
mm, mm,
So
yeah,
again, with hindsight, looking back, I could see the
sure.
steps where
Yes.
the
All these
Lord had
pieces
intervened.
are put together. Yeah. Well, and there's so many times we don't realize how God is weaving together all these different pieces that might seem like chance encounters at the time, but they become those divine points of connection in that bigger story that he's writing. And I'm thinking about that in terms of um divine connections with people in your story too that have
Hmm.
led to the next steps as well. So, can you talk about your experience with that throughout teaching abroad and visiting these different communities with Tier Fund, and how is that all tying together?
Well, there's so many interweaving parts of this, but part of the work with missionary kids, I attended conferences, international conferences on mission kids, and that's where I met Phil Rennicks, and we got to know each other in Nairobi, where I had presented the KISC model to the conference there, and we corresponded a few times and became friendly. And then when I was with Tear Fund, I started to think about the needs of these children, and I wrote down some ideas, and they sat in my computer for quite a long time.
Mm, mm. It's so important to say that, Alan, because like there's so many times when we just want to see something happen, but sometimes wait is the best thing to do. Waiting is all we can do.
Yes, yeah. So I'd put this down, and then out of nowhere, I got an email from Hungary, from Budapest in Hungary, from Share Educational Services. And it said, "Dear Alan, we're about to publish a book. You've written a chapter. Would you like a copy? Where are you?" And I was quite puzzled because I couldn't think of when I'd written a chapter for this group. It turned out to be it was the proceedings from the conference in Nairobi. But the book was called Fitted Pieces, and a picture of a jigsaw on the front, which is interesting because it was all part of the jigsaw. And the introduction to that book was written by Phil Rennicks. And it was when I saw that, Phil's the person. I should really write to Phil and see what he thinks about this idea.
It just brought it to your memory again.
He
It
got
wasn't that he wrote to you, it was just that you
no, it
saw
just
his name.
this book
Yeah.
reminded me that Phil and I had got on well, and
Yeah.
he's a very good encourager.
Mm,
So I emailed Phil, and by return email got his ideas, and they were
yeah.
so close that we knew this was of the Lord. It wasn't just two crazy old men thinking
Yeah.
ideas. Yeah, so Phil invited me to join ACSI as it was. He was the international director at that time, vice president, and I joined ACSI as their director for children at risk programs. So Phil stepped out in faith that it was the right thing to do by bringing me in, and I stepped out having no salary, and my church gave us a little bit. So we had God was good. We survived brilliantly, and and it grew.
Yeah. And that is a perfect place to pause you on that story because we will continue more of the story of what grew from that faithfulness of all the intersections of these connections and your heart for those who didn't have access to education and this resource-based model all coming together. So I'm very excited that we can continue that story. But maybe just to wrap up this part of the conversation, what was your understanding of personal calling or how God has called you? And is that something that is really mostly in retrospect, like you say, having this advantage of looking back? Or was there something right at the start that kind of drove you this whole time?
Yeah, it's a mixture of both. Looking back with hindsight, it's very easy to see, but it was a frustrating time as well because in between Seychelles and Nepal, I had 2 years unemployment.
Mm,
And
mm.
after Nepal, I had 3 years unemployed before I got the job at Tear Fund.
Yeah, see, we
Uh,
fast forwarded through so many years of life just by jumping from one thing to the next. And it's so
yes,
good to say
uh,
that, Alan.
yeah. And those years of unemployment were difficult and very frustrating at times, and just asking the Lord what is going on here. Um, you know, because I'd left a very good job in Northern Ireland in a really good school, and Margaret had given up a good job as a librarian. And when we both went back, she could only get a job at the very bottom of the library system, and actually was ended up training people above her. She was better qualified than any of them, but yeah, that's all she could get. And I was doing supply teaching, where you filling in for people who were all sick and so on. So that was a frustrating time, and we often questioned, what was going on. And so, yeah, but the Lord's timing was right. So I'm not quite sure. I learned things during those times of unemployment. I learned a lot about relying on the Lord to supply our needs, and yeah. So we're often our bank balance was bouncing along the red line all the time. That every time it got low, the Lord supplied something. So it was good. So you asked about calling. Um, we always prayed that we would do what the Lord wanted us to do. That was our constant prayer. It's still my prayer that um, if I take a wrong step, that the Lord will close the door some way. And so all these doors closing, I was obviously trying to get a job in education in Northern Ireland, and it was wrong. It's not where the Lord wanted me. It took me a number of years to learn that, to understand. So yeah, the, and the time in Tear Fund, I would never have thought of joining Tear Fund. I always thought I should be teaching. But after 3 years unemployment, I applied for this job at Tear Fund and discovered it's where God wanted me. So I'm not sure how you sort that out.
Yeah. Well, you talked about the puzzle pieces on the
Yeah,
cover of that book and how you can see all these
yeah,
puzzle pieces coming together. And if we have a belief that the Lord is the Lord of the puzzle pieces, so to speak, then that can be our driving force leading us forward. And then in hindsight, we can see the puzzle put together, right? So it's
exactly.
kind of both ends of that to know our belief of who God is and how he's at work while we're living it in the timeline of life. And then as we look back at those events, we can see that put together more. So
Yes.
we are going to wrap up this conversation here and we're going to continue with part two next week. You've said this before
Right.
that all that we had gone through in our lives up until this point was preparing us for what was to come next, the development of what would become open schools worldwide. So it just feels like a natural point to pause here and then to get into the story of open schools worldwide next week. But thank you so much for joining us today to share about your personal experiences and your faithfulness to follow the Lord in each chapter.
Alan has such a powerful testimony and story. I love hearing the way God guided his steps in such a unique way to give him the experiences that would come into effect later is just amazing.
Yes, and I love even the story of how he played the pipe organ in Northern Ireland and then ended up using that as a skill to serve the church in the Seychelles. It just always makes me smile when I hear that people are able to use what seem like random talents or trainings from the past in the roles that God places them in.
Yeah, it reminds me that God uses all of us, all parts of us, even those random talents or skills we developed long ago.
Exactly. And we're going to hear the rest of the story of open schools and how Alan was a part of that next week. So be sure to subscribe or follow the show if you aren't already, so that drops into your podcast player next Friday.
Alan, Heather, and I serve with Teach Beyond, a mission organization reaching the nations through education.
Want to learn more and get involved? Visit teachbeyond.org or follow us on social media.
To help more people find the podcast and hear about Teach Beyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share the show with a friend.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. We'll see you next week.